An academy-trained wizard is predictable. Their magic constrained by methods that require expensive training and rare components. But a wizard who learns through relationship, through harmony with the fundamental forces, such a wizard cannot be bound by the same limitations. Such a wizard threatens the monopoly the Academy's hold on magical power. Tobias turned to a spell diagram. It was a light spell, the same cantrip he'd been casting for years, one of his few reliable abilities. But Erasmus's notation was completely different. Instead of the standard gesture and incantation formula, he described it as, hold a small stone, something familiar, something that has been warmed by sunlight. Feel the memory of light within it. Ask it to remember, to share that memory with the space around you. Do not command, invite. It sounded absurd. Stones didn't have memories. Light wasn't something you invited. But Tobias had failed at magical education for 5 years using the correct methods. What did he have to lose? He picked up a smooth riverstone from his desk, something he'd found on a walk months ago and kept for no particular reason. It was cool in his palm, unremarkable. He closed his eyes and tried to feel it, really feel it. Where had it come from? A riverbank, worn smooth by water and sunlight over years. Centuries, perhaps. How many sunny days had it experienced lying on that bank? Share that with me, Tobias whispered. Not a command, not an invocation. A request. The stone warmed in his hand. Light bloomed in the room, not the harsh temporary glow of his usual cantrip, but a soft, steady radiance that seemed to emanate from the air itself. It felt different too. Calmer, more stable. When Tobias opened his eyes, the light remained, illuminating everything with the gentle quality of late afternoon sun. He stared at his hand, at the glowing stone, at the room filled with impossible light. It worked, he breathed. Over the next 3 weeks, Tobias lived a double life. By day, he attended his classes, endured the pitying looks from instructors and the mocking whispers from classmates. He continued to fail his standard practical exercises with predictable consistency. But at night, alone in his room or in hidden corners of the academy grounds, he practiced Erasmus's methods. A shield spell became a matter of asking air to thicken, to remember being solid like ice. Mage armor was accomplished by persuading threads of ambient magic to wrap around him like a favorite cloak. He learned to cast Featherfall by helping things remember how leaves descended, gently, without hurry. Each spell worked better than anything he'd achieved using academy methods, and each success proved Erasmus's theory. Tobias wasn't useless. He simply thought differently. But secrets are difficult to keep in a place filled with people trained to detect magic. It was Master Valerian who noticed first. Tobias had cast his light spell, the new version, while studying late in the library, forgetting to hide it properly. The old master had appeared from between the bookshelves, his eyes sharp and analytical. That's not the standard cantrip formula, Valerian said quietly. Tobias's mind raced, searching for excuses. But Valerian raised a hand. I'm not accusing you of anything, yet. But I know every variation of light spell taught at this academy, and what you just did wasn't any of them. Where did you learn it? The truth hovered on Tobias's tongue. Lying had never been his strength. But admitting to finding Erasmus Blackwood's grimoire, to practicing unsanctioned magical methods, I improvised, he managed finally. I've been trying different approaches. Since the standard methods don't work well for me. Valerian studied him for a long moment. Show me, it wasn't a request. Tobias repeated the spell, his hands shaking slightly. The warm, steady light filled the library corner. Valerian watched with an expression Tobias couldn't read. Not quite approval, not quite concern. Something more complex. Interesting, Valerian said finally. The efficiency is remarkable. And the stability, he waved his hand through the light. It's anchored differently than standard casting. Almost as if, he trailed off, his eyes sharpening. Sharford. Have you been reading pre-standardization texts? I found a book, Tobias admitted. In the sub-basement. After the collapse. Describe it. Tobias did, watching Valerian's face grow increasingly pale. Blackwood's grimoire, the master whispered. We thought it had been destroyed when he was expelled. The board ordered all his research burned. He grabbed Tobias's shoulder, his grip urgent. Listen to me very carefully. What you found is dangerous. Not because the magic is harmful, but because of what it represents. The academies are not just educational institutions. They are political structures, built on the premise that magical power should be controlled, regulated, channeled through proper institutions. Erasmus Blackwood's work threatened that entire system. But his methods work, Tobias protested. I've been able to… Of course they work. That's precisely the problem. Valerian released him, running a hand through his gray hair. Do you understand what happens if it becomes known that academy training is optional? That common people with no formal education could learn magic through methods that don't require expensive components or years of institutional study. The academies would lose their monopoly. The noble families who fund us would lose their advantage. The entire power structure of magical society would shift. Tobias felt cold. So, you're saying I should stop? That I should go back to being useless? I'm saying you should be careful. Valerian's voice softened. I was one of Erasmus's students, Tobias. Before he was expelled, I learned his methods and they worked beautifully. But when the board discovered what he was teaching, they didn't just expel him. They made examples of his students. Some were stripped of their credentials. Others were blacklisted from magical practice entirely. I survived only because I recanted publicly and agreed to teach exclusively Academy-approved methods. He looked away. I've regretted that decision for 40 years. Then help me, Tobias said. Help me prove that his methods work. It's not that simple. The board, a sound from deeper in the library, cut him off. Footsteps and voices. Someone was coming. Hide the grimoire, Valerian hissed. If they find it, they'll destroy it and expel you. Possibly worse. Tobias tucked the book into his robes just as 3 figures emerged from the stacks. Dean Holloway and 2 other board members, their formal robes marking them as Academy leadership. Master Valerian, Dean Holloway said, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp. Working late? And with young Ashford, I see. He needed help with illusion theory, Valerian replied smoothly. Interesting. Holloway stepped closer. There have been reports of unusual magical signatures in the Academy recently. Unregistered casting using non-standard methods. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? The grimoire seemed to burn against Tobias's chest, as if the leather itself was heating up in warning. Dean Holloway's smile never reached his eyes. He was a tall man, thin as a rapier, with silver hair pulled back in a style popular among the Academy's old guard. His fingers bore rings of office, one for each decade of service to Thornwick, and they glittered in the lamplight as he folded his hands. Unregistered casting is a serious matter, Holloway continued, his gaze moving between Valerian and Tobias. It suggests either incompetence or deception. Neither reflects well on our institution. I'm sure it's nothing more than students practicing independently, Valerian said. Young wizards often experiment with techniques not taught in any current curriculum. One of the other board members, a woman with sharp features and sharper tone, stepped forward. We're not talking about variations on standard spells, Valerian. The wards detected casting patterns that haven't been seen in this academy for 70 years. The grimoire's heat intensified. Tobias fought to keep his expression neutral, but sweat prickled at his temples. 70 years, Holloway repeated, letting the number hang in the air. A significant period, wouldn't you say, Master Valerian? That was approximately when the unpleasantness with Professor Blackwood occurred. Ancient history, Valerian said, but his voice had lost its steadiness. Is it? Holloway turned his attention fully to Tobias. Young Ashford. You're a 5th-year student with a notably poor practical record. Yet suddenly, the wards register complex magical activity originating from your vicinity. How do you explain that? Tobias's mind raced. Lying would be useless. Holloway clearly already suspected something. But admitting to the grimoire would mean its destruction and his expulsion. Maybe worse if what Valerian said was true, unless he didn't admit to finding it. Unless he claimed to have developed the techniques independently. I've been experimenting, Tobias said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Trying different approaches since the standard methods don't work well for me. Different approaches? Holloway repeated. How innovative, and where did these different approaches come from? My own research. Trial and error, I see. Holloway's smile widened. Then you won't mind demonstrating. Cast something for us. Anything you like. Using these experimental methods of yours. It was a trap, obviously. If he succeeded, he proved the methods worked, which would validate Blackwood's theories. If he failed, he'd be exposed as lying. Either way, Holloway won. But Tobias had spent 5 years being humiliated in front of instructors and classmates. He had nothing left to lose. He pulled out the Riverstone and held it in his palm. "A light spell," he said simply. He didn't close his eyes this time, didn't whisper. He simply felt the stone, remembered sunny riverbanks, and invited it to share. Light bloomed, warm, steady, perfect. The board members' expressions hardened. "Fascinating," Holloway said coldly. "That's not the Academy's light cantrip. The gesture is wrong. You used no verbal component, and the material component," he gestured at the stone. "That's not in any approved spell component catalog. Where did you truly learn this, Ashford?" "I told you, you're lying." The sharp-featured woman raised her hand, and Tobias felt magic press against his mind. Not painful, but invasive, probing. A detection spell, searching for deception. "There's something you're hiding. Something you're carrying." The grimoire burned against his chest, hot enough now that it was almost painful. "That's enough." Valerian stepped between Tobias and the board members. "You have no right to use mind magic on a student without proper cause and oversight." "We have every right when investigating threats to Academy integrity," Holloway countered. "Stand aside, Valerian." "No." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Valerian's hands had moved to spellcasting position, ready but not yet hostile. The board members mirrored the stance. "Don't do this," Holloway warned. "Your career, your reputation, I've already sacrificed those once to protect this institution's comfortable lies," Valerian said. "I won't do it again. Erasmus Blackwood was right. The Academy system is designed to limit who can access magical power, to maintain hierarchies that benefit the already powerful. If this boy has found another way, he found Blackwood's grimoire, didn't he?" The sharp-featured woman's eyes gleamed with triumph. "That's what the wards detected. The book itself radiating its poisonous theories." "Search him." "I said no." Valerian's hands glowed with building magic. Everything happened very fast. The board members attacked simultaneously, not with lethal force, but with binding and paralysis spells designed to subdue without killing. Valerian countered with a shield of force, then sent a wave of concussive energy that threw them back into the bookshelves. Tobias stumbled backward, his heart hammering. "Run!" Valerian shouted. "Get the grimoire out of the Academy. There are others who need to see it, who need to know that the old ways still work." "But go!" Tobias ran. He fled through the library's back exit, into the darkened corridors of the Academy's residential wing. Behind him, he heard shouts, the crack of magical combat, alarms beginning to sound. The grimoire bounced against his chest as he ran, its heat fading back to normal temperature. He burst out into the night air, crossing the practice yards toward the outer wall. The Academy's gates would be locked and warded. But there were other ways out. Ways he'd learned during 5 years of being ostracized, of seeking quiet places away from mocking classmates. A section of the eastern wall where old ivy grew thick enough to climb. He'd discovered it in his 2nd year. Tobias was halfway up when he heard the voice below. "Interesting choice," Dean Holloway called up, "but ultimately futile. Where will you go, Ashford? Who will shelter a failed Academy student accused of stealing forbidden texts?" Tobias kept climbing. At the top of the wall, he looked back. Holloway stood in the practice yard, illuminated by conjured lights. Master Valerian was beside him, not fighting anymore, but bound with glowing magical chains, his face bleeding from a cut above his eye. "Last chance," Holloway said. "Return the grimoire, submit to disciplinary review, and perhaps we can be lenient. Continue this foolishness, and you'll be hunted as a magical criminal. The Academies have long reach, Ashford. There's nowhere you can hide that we won't eventually find you." Tobias looked at Valerian, who met his gaze steadily. The old master nodded once, a gesture that meant go, run, survive. Tobias dropped down the other side of the wall and ran into the darkness beyond. 3 months later, Tobias stood in a small village called Millbrook, 60 miles from Thornwick Academy. He'd spent the intervening time moving from place to place, staying in cheap inns and sleeping rough when necessary, always watching for signs of pursuit. The Academy had indeed posted notices declaring him a fugitive, theft of restricted magical materials, assault on faculty, dangerous experimental practices. But Holloway had been wrong about one thing. There were people willing to shelter him. Valerian had sent a message through a complex chain of intermediaries. giving Tobias names of other former Blackwood students. They'd created a quiet network over the decades, people who remembered the old ways and resented the academy monopoly. In Millbrook, Tobias found a woman named Sarah Thornwood, a hedge witch who'd been expelled from Thornwick 30 years ago for refusing to abandon folk magic traditions. "They can't stop us all," Sarah said, serving him tea in her cluttered cottage. She was perhaps 50 with gray-streaked brown hair and hands stained with herb work. That's what they fear most. Not that people will learn unauthorized magic, but that they'll realize how much the academies have been hoarding knowledge that should belong to everyone. She'd been teaching Tobias from the grimoire for the past month, helping him understand Erasmus's methods more fully. Under her guidance, his skills had grown exponentially. He could cast spells he'd never imagined possible, not through force of will, but through understanding, through building relationships with the fundamental forces of magic. "You're a natural," Sarah said, watching him successfully cast a sophisticated illusion spell that Academy standards said should take years to master. Or rather, you're natural at this approach. The Academy system was never meant for minds like yours. Master Valerian said Erasmus had other students, Tobias ventured. People who succeeded with his methods. Where are they now? Sarah's expression darkened. Some hid, like me. Became hedge witches, wise folk, practitioners who stay beneath the Academy's notice. Others, she paused. Others tried to fight. To prove that the old ways were valid, that the Academy monopoly was unjust. The board dealt with them harshly. You mean they were killed? Disappeared, Sarah corrected. Which amounts to the same thing. The academies justify it by calling such practitioners dangerous, untrained wielders of uncontrolled power. But the truth is simpler. They couldn't allow proof that they're expensive. Exclusive system isn't necessary. Tobias thought about this while practicing a transmutation spell, turning one stone into another, not by forcing atomic restructuring, but by helping the stone remember being different, being flexible. The magic flowed easily, naturally. A knock at the cottage door interrupted his concentration. Sarah tensed immediately, her hand moving to a wand concealed in her apron. Expecting anyone? No. The knock came again, more insistent. Tobias Ashford, a young woman's voice called. We need to talk. I'm not from the academy. Sarah and Tobias exchanged glances. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But the voice sounded uncertain, almost desperate. Sarah opened the door with her wand ready. On the threshold stood a girl, perhaps 18 years old, with tangled red hair and clothes that looked like she'd been traveling rough. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but they held fierce determination. My name is Lily Marchwood, she said rapidly. I'm a first year at Greenhaven Academy, 200 miles west of here. I'm failing every practical. They're calling me useless. And last week I overheard my instructors saying I should withdraw before I embarrass my family further. She took a shaking breath. Then I saw the wanted notices about you. About Forbidden's magical texts and alternative methods. I need to know if it's real. If there's actually another way to learn. Tobias stared at her, seeing his own desperation reflected. How did you find me? I'm good at divination. It's the only academy magic I can do with any consistency. I cast a seeking spell, asking to be led to whoever could teach me. It brought me here. She looked between Sarah and Tobias. Please, I don't have anywhere else to go. Sarah studied the girl for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in, quickly. Over the next hour, Lily told her story. It was painfully familiar magical sensitivity without the ability to cast using standard methods. Years of failure and humiliation, instructors who'd written her off as hopeless. She'd heard rumors about alternative magical traditions, folk practices, but Greenhaven's library was strictly controlled. The grimoire, Tobias said finally, pulling it from his pack. It had become his constant companion, its leather warm and familiar now. This is what the Academy doesn't want people to see. Proof that their methods aren't the only ones, aren't necessarily the best ones. He opened it to one of Erasmus's core theoretical chapters and watched Lily's expression change as she read. Confusion giving way to understanding, then to anger. They knew, she whispered. All this time they knew there were other ways, and they just let us fail. Let us think we were broken. Not broken, Sarah said gently. Different. And difference threatens systems built on conformity. They spent the evening working through the grimoire's exercises together. Lily, like Tobias, took to Erasmus's methods immediately. Her first successful spell, asking water to remember being ice, brought tears to her eyes. "I'm not useless," she breathed, staring at the ice crystal in her palm. "You never were," Tobias replied. But their celebration was short-lived. That night, sleeping on Sarah's floor, Tobias dreamed. Or perhaps it wasn't quite a dream. The grimoire was glowing beside his makeshift bed, and Erasmus Blackwood's handwriting was appearing on a previously blank page. "Tobias," it read, "if you're seeing this, it means the grimoire has judged you worthy of its full truth. I am not dead, not entirely. Before the board could execute me, I bound a fragment of my consciousness to this book, preserving my knowledge and purpose. For 70 years I have waited for someone who could continue my work. The academy system is more than just inefficient or exclusive. It's deliberately designed to fail certain types of minds. In doing so, it ensures that magical power remains concentrated in bloodlines and families willing to pay for expensive training. Alternative methods threaten this structure because they're accessible to anyone with patience and sensitivity. You have a choice now: hide, practice in secret, survive quietly, or fight. Gather others like yourself, prove that the old ways work, force the academies to acknowledge that their monopoly on magical education is a lie. I could not win this battle. Perhaps you can." The grimoire contains more than spells. It holds evidence of the academy founders' deliberate suppression of alternative methods. Documents proving they knew folk magic was equally valid. Use it. Share it. Share it. Break their monopoly. But know this: they will come for you with everything they have. The board will not tolerate challenges to their authority. Choose carefully. The writing faded, and Tobias sat in the darkness, his heart pounding. Sarah had told him about practitioners who'd tried to fight, who'd disappeared. Valerian had sacrificed his career and perhaps his freedom to give Tobias time to escape. How many more would suffer if he continued down this path? But he thought about Lily's tears when she finally cast a successful spell. About the countless students who'd been told they were useless, broken, failures, when they were simply different. About the knowledge being hoarded by institutions that claimed to serve magical education while actually serving their own power. When dawn broke, Tobias made his decision. "We're not hiding," he told Sarah and Lily over breakfast. "We're going to share this. Copy the grimoire's methods. Distribute them. Teach anyone who wants to learn. Let the academies try to suppress knowledge once it's in hundreds of hands instead of just ours." Sarah looked worried, but Lily's eyes blazed with fierce agreement. "They'll call us criminals," Sarah warned. "They already do," Tobias replied. "Let them. We'll be criminals who prove that magic belongs to everyone, not just the privileged few who can afford academy training." He opened the grimoire to a fresh page and began to write, copying Erasmus's words carefully. They would need many copies, would need to spread them far and wide. It would take time, resources, and tremendous risk. But for the first time in his life, Tobias Ashford, the useless mage, was doing something that mattered. And he wouldn't stop until every failed academy student knew the truth. They weren't broken. The system was. The copying began that very morning. Sarah had connections, other hedge witches, village wise folk, traveling merchants who owed her favors. Within a week, they produced 5 handwritten copies of the grimoire's core teachings. Within a month, 20 more were in circulation, spreading through underground networks that the academies didn't even know existed. Tobias discovered something unexpected during this process. Teaching others made him stronger. Each time he explained Erasmus's methods to a struggling student, his own understanding deepened. Magic wasn't about memorizing formulas. It was about building intuition, developing relationships with the fundamental forces. The more he shared, the more clearly he understood this truth. Lily proved invaluable. Her divination talents, which Greenhaven Academy had dismissed as mediocre, became powerful when applied through Erasmus's approach. She could sense where the grimoire's teachings were most needed, could identify students on the verge of giving up who might benefit from alternative methods. Her scrying led them to a shepherd's son in the Northern Highlands who could speak to stones but couldn't cast a single Academy-approved earth spell, to a blacksmith's daughter who understood fire intimately but failed every evocation practical, to a dozen others scattered across the region. They began to gather. By the 3rd month, Tobias's small group had grown to 37 people, all academy failures or folk practitioners, all eager to learn methods that actually worked for their minds. They established a base in an abandoned monastery deep in the Whisperwood Forest, far from major cities and academy jurisdiction. Sarah named it the Blackwood Circle, in honor of Erasmus. "We're not trying to replace the academies," Tobias explained to the assembled group one evening, standing in what had once been the monastery's chapel. Firelight flickered across faces young and old, hopeful and hardened. "We're proving they're not the only path. Magic should be accessible to anyone with the dedication to learn, regardless of whether their mind works the way academy instructors expect. The academies won't see it that way." Someone called from the back, a middle-aged man named Thomas, who'd been expelled from Silver Peak Academy 15 years ago for unsuitable temperament. "They'll see us as a threat. Then let them come," Lily said fiercely. "We're not doing anything wrong. We're just learning," but Thomas was right to be concerned. The first attack came on a cold morning 2 weeks later. Tobias was working with a young gnome woman named Pip on transmutation techniques when the wards he'd set around the monastery began shrieking warnings. Through the windows, he saw purple robes, academy inquisitors, a dozen of them, approaching through the forest. "Everyone inside!" Sarah's voice rang across the courtyard. "Defensive positions!" Tobias had known this moment would come, had prepared for it. But seeing the inquisitors emerge from the tree line, their hands already glowing with spell energy, made his stomach clench with fear. The lead inquisitor raised her voice, magically amplified to carry across the monastery grounds. "By authority of the Inter-Academy Council, you are ordered to surrender all unauthorized magical texts and submit to questioning. Resistance will be met with appropriate force." "Appropriate force," Sarah muttered beside Tobias. "That's what they called it when they killed Erasmus's other students too." Tobias stepped forward, his hands raised peacefully. "We're not using Forbidden's magic. We're simply teaching alternative methods. You're harboring stolen academy property," the Inquisitor interrupted. "The Blackwood Grimoire belongs to Thornwick Academy. Its theft and distribution constitute serious crimes. Knowledge can't be stolen," Tobias replied. "It can only be shared. Semantics won't save you, Ashford." The Inquisitor's expression hardened. "Last warning. Surrender the grimoire and dismiss your followers, or we will extract it by force." Tobias felt the weight of 37 people watching him, waiting for his decision. He could surrender, protect them by taking the blame himself. The Inquisitors would probably let the others go. They were after him, after the grimoire, after the threat to Academy authority, or he could fight. Except it wasn't really a fight if one side had all the advantages. The Inquisitors were Academy-trained specialists in magical combat. His group consisted mostly of failed students and folk practitioners who'd spent years being told they weren't good enough. But they'd also spent the last 3 months learning that the Academy way wasn't the only way. "No," Tobias said simply. The Inquisitor's hand blazed with fire. So be it. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers for years afterward. The Inquisitors attacked with overwhelming force, fireballs, lightning bolts, binding spells, the full arsenal of combat magic. It should have been a massacre. 37 untrained practitioners against 12 elite Inquisitors should have ended in minutes. But Erasmus's methods had taught them something the academies had forgotten. Magic wasn't about power. It was about relationship. When the fireballs came, the Blackwood Circle didn't try to counter them with shields of force. They asked the air to remember being cool, asked the flames to remember being embers. The fireballs diminished, sputtered, died. When lightning struck, they didn't try to ground it through traditional methods. They invited it to spread harmlessly, to diffuse through the earth like rain soaking into soil. The bolts scattered into harmless sparks. The binding spells were trickier. Several circle members were caught, magical ropes tightening around their limbs. But Lily, her divination enhanced by Erasmus's teachings, had anticipated this. She prepared countercharms based on sympathetic magic, asking the ropes to remember being separate threads, asking the magic to remember being wild and free. The bindings frayed and fell away. The Inquisitors' confidence began to crack. They'd expected easy victory, not organized resistance using techniques they didn't recognize. Their leader called for a tactical retreat, regrouping at the forest's edge. "What in the hells was that?" Tobias heard one of them shout. "Those weren't standard counterspells." "Blackwood's methods," another replied. "The old ways. I've read about them in restricted archives. They said he could teach hedge witches to rival academy masters." The Inquisitors conferred briefly. Then the leader turned back to the monastery. Her expression had shifted from confident authority to something harder, more dangerous. "You've proven yourselves more capable than expected," she called out. "But this changes nothing. The Inter-Academy Council cannot allow unauthorized teaching to spread. If you won't surrender peacefully, we'll return with greater force." This was merely reconnaissance. They withdrew into the forest, leaving the Blackwood Circle standing in the courtyard, breathless and shaking with adrenaline. "We won," Pip whispered, her gnomish face split by a wide grin. "We survived," Sarah corrected grimly. "That's not the same thing." "She's right, they'll be back with more inquisitors. Maybe battle mages. We held them off because they underestimated us. They won't make that mistake twice. Then we need allies," Tobias said, an idea forming. The Inquisitor said something important. This was ordered by the Inter-Academy Council. That means all the major academies are aligned against us. But not everyone in the magical community supports the academy system. "You're thinking of the independent practitioners," Thomas said. "Wandering wizards, sorcerers, warlocks. People who learned magic outside formal institutions." "Exactly. And more than that, there are people within the academies who disagree with the council's policies. Master Valerian wasn't the only one. If we can find them, convince them to speak out." "You're talking about splitting the academy system from within," Sarah said slowly. "That's ambitious. Possibly suicidal. So is staying here waiting for the Inquisitors to return with an army," Lily pointed out. Over the next few days, they debated strategy. The grimoire, still in Tobias's possession, offered occasional guidance. Erasmus's preserved consciousness adding insights from his own failed rebellion. The key, Erasmus suggested, wasn't to destroy the academies but to force them to evolve. To prove that alternative methods were valid. That magical education could be more inclusive. Tobias began writing letters, using Sarah's network to deliver them to sympathetic academy instructors, independent practitioners, even noble families whose children had been labeled unsuitable for magical training. He shared excerpts from the grimoire, explained Erasmus's theories, invited people to witness what the Blackwood Circle had accomplished. Some letters went unanswered, others received hostile responses. But just a few came back with cautious interest. A wandering sorcerer named Kai arrived first, claiming he'd spent 20 years developing similar techniques independently and was thrilled to find others who understood. Then came a former academy instructor named Helena, who'd been forced into early retirement for questioning curriculum standards. A warlock who'd made a pact with a knowledge spirit and learned that magic was far more flexible than academy doctrine admitted. The circle grew to 50 members, then 70, then 100. And with each new arrival, the grimoire seemed to grow warmer, more alive. Erasmus's consciousness, preserved in its pages, was strengthening as his teachings spread. Sometimes, late at night, Tobias could almost hear the old wizard's voice whispering encouragement. But the academies were watching too. And they weren't pleased. 4 months after the first Inquisitor attack, Dean Holloway himself arrived at the Whisperwood Forest. Not with Inquisitors this time, but with a delegation of academy leaders, deans and archmages from 6 major institutions, their formal robes glittering with enchantments. They requested a meeting. Neutral ground, peaceful terms, just to talk. "It's obviously a trap," Lily said immediately. Probably, Tobias agreed. But what if it's not? What if they're actually willing to negotiate? "They're not," Sarah insisted. "The academies don't negotiate with people they see as criminals. They're trying to lure you out." But Tobias was tired of running, tired of hiding. The Blackwood Circle had proven that alternative methods worked. They trained dozens of people who'd been written off as hopeless. If there was even a chance of reaching some kind of accord, wasn't it worth the risk? Against Sarah's advice, against his own better judgment, Tobias agreed to meet. The meeting place was a clearing halfway between the monastery and the main road, far enough from both locations to seem neutral, close enough to Tobias's wards for him to feel marginally safe. He brought Sarah, Lily, and Kai the wandering sorcerer. Holloway brought 5 other academy leaders and, notably, no visible guards. They sat at a conjured table, the autumn sun filtering through red-gold leaves overhead. "You've caused quite a disruption, Mr. Ashford," Holloway began, his tone more conversational than hostile. "Failed academy student turns magical revolutionary." "It's almost romantic. I'm not a revolutionary," Tobias replied carefully. I'm just a teacher, teaching unauthorized methods from a stolen text. One of the other deans interjected, a dwarven woman with elaborate beard braids. That's not teaching. That's sedition. Erasmus Blackwood's grimoire doesn't belong to Thornwick Academy, Tobias countered. It belongs to anyone who can learn from it. Knowledge should be… Spare us the philosophy, Holloway interrupted. We didn't come here to debate educational theory. We came to make you an offer. Tobias exchanged glances with Sarah. An offer. That was unexpected. The Inter-Academy Council has been observing your… experiment, Holloway continued. And while we cannot condone the theft or your methods of distribution, we acknowledge that Blackwood's teachings have shown some merit. Certain students who struggle with standard curricula might benefit from alternative approaches. So you're admitting he was right? Lily demanded. That the academy system is flawed? We're admitting that education can be multifaceted, another dean said smoothly, a half-elf with silver hair and diplomatic smile. The council is prepared to offer you a position, Mr. Ashford. A newly created chair of alternative magical pedagogy at Thornwick Academy. You would teach your methods officially, under proper supervision, with full institutional support. Tobias stared. You want to legitimize Erasmus's work? Within appropriate parameters, yes. Your students would be integrated into the academy system, their training standardized and regulated. The grimoire would be returned to secure archives, where scholars could study it properly. And you go from fugitive to pioneering educator. Quite the redemption arc. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. What's the catch? Sarah asked bluntly. Holloway's smile was thin. The circle dissolves. No more unauthorized teaching, no more distribution of unvetted magical texts. Everyone returns to proper channels, either enrolling in academies or ceasing magical practice entirely. Your methods become academy property, taught only by certified instructors following approved curricula. In other words, Kai said quietly, you'd control everything. Just like before, we'd ensure quality and safety, the Dwarven Dean corrected. Magic is dangerous in untrained hands. Surely you understand the need for oversight. Tobias looked at the faces around the table. Academy leaders offering him legitimacy, acceptance, everything he dreamed of during 5 years of failure. A chance to teach at Thornwick, to help struggling students, to vindicate Erasmus's memory. All he had to do was surrender control. Let the academies regulate and standardize the very methods that worked because they were flexible and individual. No, Tobias said. Holloway's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I'd consider carefully, Mr. Ashford. This offer is remarkably generous given your crimes. If you refuse, the council will have no choice but to treat you as a genuine threat. And we will respond accordingly. You'll hunt us, Tobias stated flatly. Send inquisitors, battle mages, whatever it takes to shut us down. If necessary. Holloway stood, the other deans following his lead. You have 3 days to reconsider. After that, the offer expires and enforcement begins. Choose wisely. They left, disappearing down the forest path with military precision. Sarah let out a long breath. Well, at least now we know where we stand. We need to scatter, Kai said immediately. Distribute the circle's members. Make ourselves harder to target. No. Tobias was surprised by the certainty in his own voice. No more running. No more hiding. If the academies want a confrontation, let's give them one. Tobias. Sarah began.
Not with violence, he clarified. With truth. Public truth.
Holloway said they've been observing us, which means they know our methods work. They're not offering me that position because they're generous. They're trying to contain the threat before it spreads further. But what if it's already spread too far to contain? Over the next 3 days, the Blackwood Circle enacted Tobias's plan. They didn't fortify the monastery or prepare for battle. Instead, they went public. Every member with divination skills scribed for struggling academy students, sending them copies of the grimoire's key teachings along with invitations to open demonstrations. Kai used his sorceress contacts to spread word through the independent magical community. Helena leveraged her old academy connections, reaching out to sympathetic instructors who'd been silenced or sidelined for questioning the system. On the 3rd day, Tobias and 50 circle members traveled to Thornwick itself. Not to attack, not to hide, but to teach. They set up in the public square outside the academy's walls and began demonstrating Erasmus's methods. showing anyone who'd watch how alternative approaches worked. Current Academy students came first, curious and skeptical. Then townspeople whose children had been rejected from Academy training. Then, surprisingly, a few instructors, not many, but enough to matter. They watched as Lily helped a merchant's daughter cast her first successful spell using sympathetic magic. Watched as Kai demonstrated transmutation through relationship rather than force. Watched as person after person who'd been labeled unsuitable or untalented proved capable of sophisticated magic when taught methods that matched their minds. The Inquisitors arrived within hours, of course. But they found a crowd of over 200 people surrounding the Circle's demonstration. Attacking openly in front of so many witnesses would be politically disastrous. Dean Holloway appeared, his face tight with controlled fury. "This is a legal gathering and unauthorized instruction. I'm ordering you to disperse immediately. We're on public land," Tobias replied calmly. "And we're not forcing anyone to learn. We're simply offering an alternative to those who want it. You're undermining institutional authority." "We're proving that your institution doesn't have a monopoly on magical education," Sarah interrupted. "There's a difference." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several Academy students were nodding, whispering to each other. Tobias saw doubt spreading, not in his methods, but in the Academy's absolute authority. Holloway saw it too. His hand moved toward his spell component pouch, but one of the watching instructors, an elderly man Tobias vaguely recognized from his own student days, stepped forward. "Dean Holloway," the instructor said carefully, "perhaps we should consider a more comprehensive review of our pedagogical approaches. If there are students we've been failing unnecessarily, Master Corwin, this is not the time. When is the time?" Another voice called from the crowd. A current student, 5th year from her robes. "I've been barely passing for 4 years. If there's another way that might actually work for me, why shouldn't I be allowed to try it? Because it's unregulated." Holloway snapped, losing his diplomatic composure. "Because we have no idea what long-term effects these methods might have. Because allowing every hedge witch and failed student to practice magic however they please will lead to chaos. Or it will lead to more mages," Tobias said quietly. "More people capable of using magic safely and effectively. Isn't that supposed to be what academies want? Isn't education supposed to be about helping people learn, not controlling who gets to learn?" The silence that followed was profound. Master Corwin spoke again. "I move for a formal academic council review of alternative pedagogical methods. With open demonstrations, empirical testing, and if proven effective, potential integration into standard curricula." "Seconded," another instructor called. Holloway looked around at the crowd, at the nodding heads, at the Academy's own instructors breaking ranks. Political calculation flickered across his face. He could force the issue, could order the Inquisitors to arrest everyone. But it would fracture the Academy's public image, possibly trigger student revolts, definitely make him look tyrannical. Or he could seem reasonable, agree to a review process he could later manipulate. "Very well," Holloway said tightly. "A formal review. 3 months of controlled testing, supervised demonstrations, empirical assessment." But his gaze locked onto Tobias. "All alternative teaching ceases until the review is complete. No more public demonstrations, no more distributed texts. If you truly believe your methods are valid, prove it through proper channels." It was still a trap, probably. A way to buy time, to find legal grounds to shut them down later. But it was also a crack in the wall, acknowledgement that the Academy system might need to change. Tobias looked at Sarah, at Lily, at the faces of the Blackwood Circle. Saw hope mixed with wariness. "We agree," he said finally. "On one condition. The review includes students who failed under current methods. Let them try alternatives and compare results. Real evidence, not just theoretical debate." Holloway's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Acceptable." The crowd erupted in conversation, some excited, some skeptical, all engaged. As the Inquisitors withdrew and people began to disperse, Master Valerian appeared from the Academy's gates. He looked older, more tired than Tobias remembered, but his eyes were clear. "That was well played," Valerian said quietly, approaching Tobias. "Forcing them to engage with your methods legitimately rather than just suppressing them. Erasmus would have been proud." "It's not over," Tobias replied. "They'll try to rig the review, discredit us somehow. Of course they will. But you've changed the conversation. People are questioning the academy system, wondering if there might be better ways. That's what Erasmus wanted. Not to destroy the academies, but to force them to evolve. Valerian smiled slightly. You've done more in 6 months than he managed in 20 years. The circle is growing too large to suppress quietly. Over the following months, Tobias learned the truth of that statement. The review process was exactly as biased as he'd expected. Test conditions designed to favor academy methods. Evaluators predisposed to find faults. But the results were undeniable. Students who'd been failing catastrophically showed dramatic improvement with alternative methods. Not all of them. Some genuinely did better with standard teaching. But enough to prove that Erasmus had been right about different minds needing different approaches. More importantly, the review became public. Independent scholars attended. Journalists wrote articles. Other academies sent observers, and some of them, particularly smaller, regional institutions began quietly experimenting with integrated curricula that included alternative methods. The Inter-Academy Council fought every step, but they were losing control of the narrative. When they tried to classify the full review as restricted research, 3 council members resigned in protest. When they attempted to discredit Tobias personally, former students came forward, defending him. When they threatened legal action against anyone teaching alternative methods, regional governors questioned whether academy charters really gave them that authority. The monopoly was cracking. 2 years after Tobias fled Thornwick Academy as a fugitive, he returned as an invited speaker, not with a criminal record, but with an honorary degree and official recognition. As the founder of Integrative Magical Pedagogy, the Blackwood Circle had been legitimized, transformed from underground rebellion to respected educational movement. Erasmus Blackwood's name, once associated with disgrace and expulsion, was being rehabilitated in academic circles. His grimoire was still controversial, but copies were no longer confiscated on site. Debate had replaced suppression. Dean Holloway had quietly retired. Master Valerian now sat on the Academy Council, advocating for continued reform. And Tobias, standing in Thornwick's Great Hall, looking out at an audience that included struggling students, skeptical professors, curious researchers, and true believers, felt the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders. "We haven't won," he told his audience honestly. Educational change is slow, institutions are resistant, and there are still those who believe magic should be controlled and restricted to the properly trained elite. But we've proven something important, that there are multiple valid paths to magical competence. That failure in one system doesn't mean failure as a mage. That knowledge shared grows stronger, not weaker. He touched the grimoire, still his constant companion, now openly displayed rather than hidden. Erasmus Blackwood wrote that magic is about relationship, not domination. About harmony, not force. I think he meant more than just spellcasting technique. He meant our relationship with knowledge itself, how we share it, who we allow to access it, whether we hoard it or spread it freely. The academy system was built on control. We're building something new, something more open. And yes, it's messy and complicated and sometimes chaotic. But it's also more honest, more inclusive, more true to what magic actually is. Applause filled the hall. Not universal, but substantial. Tobias saw Lily in the front row, now an instructor herself. Saw Sarah and Kai and dozens of other circle members scattered throughout the audience. Saw current students listening with the desperate hope he remembered from his own darkest days. After his speech, a young woman approached, first-year student, maybe 17, with the haunted look of someone already being told she wasn't good enough. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "That you failed for 5 years before finding methods that worked?" "It's true," Tobias confirmed. "So there's hope? For people like us?" Tobias smiled, pulling out a copy of the grimoire, one of hundreds they'd printed legally now, with proper citation and academy approval. "There's always hope. You're not broken and you're not useless. You just need to find the approach that fits your mind. Here, start with Chapter 3. It explains the fundamental difference between force-based and harmony-based casting. See if it resonates." She took the book with reverent care, and Tobias saw in her eyes the same transformation he'd experienced in that dusty sub-basement, the shift from despair to possibility. That night, Alone in guest quarters that were far nicer than his old dormitory room, Tobias opened the grimoire one final time. New text had appeared on the last page. Erasmus's consciousness offering final words. Well done, my student. You've accomplished what I could not, proving that change is possible, that institutions can evolve when forced to confront truth. The Blackwood Circle will outlive both of us, I think. It will face new challenges, new resistance, but the seed has been planted. Magic belongs to anyone willing to learn. Keep teaching that truth, and perhaps someday it will be so obvious that no one thinks to question it. Thank you for carrying my work forward. Thank you for being braver than I was. Now rest. You've earned it. The writing faded, and with it, Tobias felt Erasmus's presence fade as well, not gone but released. The grimoire was just a book again, no longer housing a fragment of consciousness. Its teachings remained, its knowledge preserved, but the man who'd written it could finally let go. Tobias closed the book gently and placed it on the desk. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new resistance from those who still believed in the old ways. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply be. No longer the useless mage, no longer the fugitive, no longer the revolutionary. Just Tobias Ashford, teacher, scholar. Proof that failure isn't final, and that everyone deserves a chance to find their path to magic. The academy bells tolled midnight across Thornwick's campus, and in his small room, Tobias smiled. O destino desta historia, esta nas suas mas. Se voca acredita que o heroi não esta sozinho, dix su like. Se voca vaio o que os outros não viram, escreva sua teoria nas comentários. E se voca precisa saber o que acontece a seguir, inscreva-se. O próximo capítulo vai mudar tudo.